what we're going to be doing for part of the time, I need to join a discussion group for just a little bit. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give a break at 7, about from 7 to 7:15, and then so I'm going to start a discussion by just giving some. Well, all right, Olivine, I think we should start recording.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Sir, I switched over a while ago, and I'm not seeing it in the chat. So when it's closer, you can just repost the links in the chat when it's closer to the time.
Okay, let me.
I can do that for you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, so as we promised last week, so good evening, everyone. As I promised last week, we'll shift the gear and begin to have conversation around qualitative research. And a part of, what we spoke about initially is that we'll be doing just a general overview. We'll talk about aspects of quantitative research, aspects of qualitative research, and the end game is that we want to come to talk about mixed methods research. But in understanding mixed methods research, it better serves us to understand or be reintroduced or be oriented to aspects of quantitative research and qualitative research to get a better understanding of what mixed methods research is. So I remember Gio, for example, was trying to make the connection last week with the readings, and you may have been seeing aspects of it talking about mixed methods. The ultimate is that we want to have a conversation about mixed methods, as I said, but it makes sense to understand aspects of quant and qual. So last week we ended our conversation with quant for now, right? And we actually had some discussion around how it is that we use one statistical package to do some analysis of data, right? In fact, I'm using a Nix computer because I just remember now that we're supposed to do a continuation. But I hope that persons watched the videos, because I did send some videos looking at reliability, the correlation, things like those. So I do hope that you guys watch the video. When we get back to talking about mixed methods, surely we'll come back to some of those different types of analyses, and then we'll see how the integration of both the quant and qual can happen. Because for mixed methods, we're going to talk about different designs, which will include aspects of quant and qual being integrated. So for the next 3 weeks, we're going to be focusing on content area that is relevant to qualitative research. And I'm going to use the designs to steer the conversation, right? So for today's conversation, I want us to have a brief understanding of what are the different research approaches. Depending on who you're reading, they'll talk about research approaches, research designs, or the genre of qualitative research. So we'll stop talking about quantitative research, the numbers and statistics and those sorts of things, and we're shifting here to talk about the text, images, sound, graphics, those types of data that we interface with. So we're talking about qualitative research now, right? So in that conversation, we have to talk about how to go about identifying your research problem. If you remember, we had some conversation around that in the beginning of talking about quantitative research. But just like with quantitative research, we also have to identify some form of a problem or research statement, right? And by now we'd actually recognize that it is an important part of going forward in doing a research, whether it be quantitative or qualitative. Because as I oftentimes say to people, if it's not broken, do not go fixing it. So if there isn't a need for a research, if there isn't something worth exploring or investigating, you know, worth discovering, worth describing, you know, then don't go fix it, right? It's almost like your pipe at home, there's no rupture, there's nothing, it's not broken, and you go and interfere with it because you're saying, oh, the pipe needs fixing, when in fact the pipe does need fixing, right? So that's an important thing. Oftentimes people go, you know, trying to find things to research, and they come up with all sorts of things, which some of the times aren't researchable either. So that's the other thing we have to take into consideration, that not everything that comes to our mind is really researchable in its true sense. Inherent in the research statement of issue or problem is going to be a purpose statement, and out of that purpose statement then arise some research question, or at least a research question, right? So we're going to have conversation around these different areas, and then we're going to talk about different designs. So there are actually 5 designs that we'll talk about in this conversation, and you'll see them from your course outline. So we're going to spend some time talking about case studies as a design, a qualitative research design, grounded theory, phenomenology, ethnography, and narrative. There is also generic research. I won't go too much in that, but just in a cursory way to talk about generic research. These are all research designs. What is useful to note though is based on the type of research design that we take on, the considerations will be different. And by consideration, I mean the sample size, the type of research question that you will write, the data collection method or strategies that you will employ, right? So depending on the research design, those things will differ. Right?
Sir, narrative, do they also call it biography? Because that's what I saw.
Right. So you will, who's that, Gio?
Yeah, man, Giovanni.
Good. It shows me that you're reading. Yeah. So in the handouts that I've given you, there's a 2-page document which you will see there that it makes reference to biography. I think it is John Cresswell who wrote that, right? But biography is really talking about, you know, stories of persons, the lived experience of persons, but more looking at it through a storied approach, right? So we'll talk about that. So what you need to know from this conversation is that when we talk about the 5 different research designs or approaches, but this conversation, we're talking about case studies, we're talking about grounded theory, phenomenology, ethnography, and narrative. And I just made mention that we'll touch just a little bit on generic research, which is really taking into consideration all of those 5 that I just mentioned. So generic is relatively new when you compare them to the different designs that are out there. Yeah. I thought of bringing back this matrix just to remind you of the conversations that we've been having over the past few weeks. So if you remember, for the last few weeks, or at least 3 weeks, we spent some time talking about or focusing on the post-positivist realm, right? For the next 3 weeks, we're going to switch gear and we're going to be looking through a constructivist worldview. So our worldview is going to be more into constructivism and interpretivism, which is more aligned with qualitative research. Positivism or positivists are more in line with quantitative research, right? But it is useful to note that even with taking a constructivist worldview, there are still some philosophical assumptions that we have to take note of. So there is still an ontology that is linked to constructivism. There is also the epistemology that is linked with constructivism. The axiology is also, real. The methodology that is employed with qualitative research is important, and the rhetoric, the language that is spoken in qualitative research is important. So one of the things I oftentimes tell people, the purpose of your research, if it is properly written, can help you to identify, or your reader to identify the research methodology, whether it is a qualitative piece of research or a quantitative piece of research. And later in the conversation, I'm going to show you exactly why that is so. Because there are certain terms that are better aligned with qualitative research than with quantitative research. So from a constructivist approach, when we talk about the ontology, we're saying that, we're talking about, or we're questioning what's the nature of reality. And if we're looking at it through a constructivist lens or from the qualitative perspective, what we're saying is that the researcher takes on multiple perspectives, right? Meaning that I may, for example, grow up in the country and you may grow up in the country as well, wherever country is, or even the same community, but our experiences will be different. Or we go to the same school, but our experiences will be different, right? And this is part of why qualitative research is said to be more on the subjective side of things, as opposed to quantitative research, which is more on the objective side, right? In terms of how we come to know what we know and the relationship that exists with the researcher and the researched, for qualitative research, the researcher is oftentimes more close to the participant. And take, for example, if you're doing interviews or if you're studying a particular phenomenon, it makes sense that you're going to interview the person, you're going to have conversations with the person, you're going to observe, you're going to look through literature, you're going to probably look through their, like, for example, I identified one person and I consistently looked through that person's WhatsApp posts, with permission, of course, but I found valuable information, right? And this was actually having had conversations with the person, having the person actually write for me a reflection, but that was another source of data, right? And what I found very interesting and very nice is from the interview, conversation started to emerge. And I got somewhat closer to the person and got to understand the person a little more. It's not the same with quantitative research. You go and collect your data and, pretty much that's the end of it unless you want to clarify something. With qualitative research, there is a lot more closeness that is achieved between the participant and the researcher, right? So that is how we come to know what we know, as well as, develop a greater relationship between yourself and the person who is being researched. If we're looking at the philosophical assumption, which we identify as the axiology, right? Qualitative research takes on a bit of bias. And I remember thinking the initial conversations, I used the word bracketing. And I then went on to explain, or it was mentioned, I think, in a video by Chris Flip, and I went on to explain the whole idea of bracketing, because in qualitative research based on the genre, and you'll see in phenomenology, for example, that's a term that is prominent in phenomenology, the researcher has to bracket his or her experiences as well as thought processes around a particular subject area, right? Or a particular phenomenon. And why this is so is that you don't want to bias, or you want to lessen that bias, right? That exists. So it is also important that as a researcher, you declare who you are, which if you read, you will see the literature speaks about your positionality as a researcher. It's always good to identify the position or the lens that you're coming through. So in my study, for example, I'm looking through what I'm studying from the lens of a researcher, but also I am a former high school student. I am somebody in education, but I also have children. And so I have to declare, and relatives in high school, and I then have to declare, my biases. So initially in my study, I speak about, how I got treated by one high school teacher versus another. And in one instance, I almost felt very bitter about one high school teacher. And as I went through the research, I then had to identify that, listen, I had to declare exactly how I felt, but I also had to try and control how I felt, because having not done that, it could actually then influence how I perceived some of the teachers, and also how I would go about even collecting the data and interpreting the data. So I literally had to declare, my biases. So you will find in quantitative research that you're gonna have biases, and it is useful as the researcher to declare those biases. It's also a part of the ethical consideration, because in some instances, if you feel very strong about something, it makes no sense, for example, that you even take on a research of that nature. It's better you just give it up, or say, I won't be a part of this research, right? Because in some instances, your bias is just too strong. From a methodological standpoint, and we mentioned this in one class, that if we're talking about qualitative research, we're looking at it through a very inductive, or taking a very inductive approach. And so with this, the researcher starts with the participants' views, and then, having received those views, build patterns, establish theories, and in some instances, seek to, and I don't necessarily particularly like the word generalization, but to seek to actually do what is known as transferability, right? Or to transfer what we know from one situation or scenario to our next, right? So we start very small and then go somewhat large. So if you look at an ice cream cone, at the base, the cone is small, but then as you move up, it starts to increase, right? So you start from an inductive level, or an inductive approach, and then move up the line. The rhetoric in qualitative research is quite interesting, because how we speak, for example, and one example is in quantitative research, for example, the researcher speaks about the subject, while in qualitative research, the researcher will speak about the participant or the key informants. And for example, in qualitative research, depending on what you're doing, the first person is acceptable, versus in quantitative research, it may not be acceptable. So the quantitative researchers will speak about the researcher with that sense of trying to distance him or herself from the research or the process that is at play. So those are some of the distinctions to take note of. So let me just, and you would remember we spoke about, well, 3 processes in the implementation or the initial discussion. One was a qualitative research approach. And so you'd have seen this before. One of the things that I did identify is that as opposed to quantitative research, there is a part of qualitative research which is quite recursive. And so if you look at this process map here, you're seeing where it starts with a general research question. But by now we appreciate that we would have developed or shaped this research question based on a problem or a statement of issue, and also a purpose that, you know, we would have actually thought through. So here we're seeing that the process starts with a generic research approach. Now, what is important here is that we may start, and it says a general research question, because what we find happening down the line is that different research questions can emerge as we go about doing this research. So having identified that general research question, we would select the research participants, the site, right? The research site, collect relevant data, and there's some planning around that, planning the relevant data, which also includes piloting the instrument. Yes? So even though it is qualitative research, we have to develop instruments based on the research genre or the research method that we're employing. So if we're doing interviews, for example, there are instruments that are appropriate. If we're doing observations, for example, there are instruments that are going to be appropriate. And we'll talk about those later on in the conversation. So in a general sense, we collect data, but it doesn't stop there. And one of the things that you will see, well, which is missing from this, but I think it is a given, that having collected the data, we're going to have to go through a process of transcribing that data, do member checking, analyzing the data to make sense of it. And please note, I've sent you a document, a book by Saldana, which helps you with your analysis, your coding and analysis, right? And ultimately, we're interpreting that data which we have analyzed, right? So we're analyzing it to see what the data is saying, and then we're interpreting the data to say, okay, what are we getting from the data? Having received that from the data, that set up, you know, so from the data, we can then conceptualize and build some theoretical work, right? So if you remember, I was talking about building theory as opposed to testing theory, right? So having interpreted the data, we can see some theory emerging, right? And that brings us back into the loop, and which is why I'm saying qualitative research has a recursive element, because having collected the data, something may be still unsettling that requires you to go back through a loop and start a whole planning process again for collecting additional data, right? And so more specific research questions will emerge having collected the data. So there's something that is still uneasy, unsettling, and you say, I still don't understand this. I need to go further. I need to inquire some more. I need to explore some more. I need to get some more views on probably why this is happening, what this is happening, you know, what is this happening? And we go through that cycle of collecting more data, interpret until we're satisfied, and finally, we do the write-up of the findings and present them. Now, take note of the use of terminology, and this is part of where rhetoric comes in again, because you notice the word writing up of the findings. Findings is more the term or the expression or the rhetoric that is used for qualitative research. you will see on the quantitative side, you see results, the word results. On the qualitative side, you will see the word findings. So that's something to take note of as well, right? So
Sir,
it's
can you repeat
important.
that?
So you notice at this end portion, it says write up of the findings. And earlier we spoke about rhetoric, right? What's the language that is used, right? So findings is more the term that is linked to qualitative research. So you write up the findings of your qualitative research versus you write up the results that you get from your quantitative data.
Okay.
Yeah? People kind of use them interchangeably, but when you talk about the results, we're more talking about results from quantitative research versus the findings from qualitative research. Right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. To the point there is that when you read, for example, and if you read wide enough, you will see much of the literature speaks about qualitative research findings and quantitative research results. And so that's part of how the rhetoric comes in, the language that is used based on the methodology. All right? And if you remember, for this conversation, we're saying when we're talking about methodology, we're saying it's either quant, qual, or mixed methods. So that assumption still applies, or that still applies, premise still applies, that when I say methodology, I'm either referring to quant, qual, or mixed. All right? Let me stop sharing this for a moment and just quickly play for you a video that really gives you a sense of quant and qual research. So it's an overview of qualitative research methods, but it kind of gives you a sense of quant and qual as well. All right?
Welcome to this overview of qualitative research methods. This tutorial will help give you the big picture of qualitative research and introduce key concepts that will help you
hearing?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Oh, bigger.
determine if qualitative methods are appropriate for your project study. First, let's review what research, particularly educational research, is designed to do. Research is an organized, systematic, disciplined approach to answering questions about our observations and experiences in the world. It is a structured approach to gathering and interpreting information that allows us to understand, theorize about, or explain experience. What then is distinctive about qualitative research? Qualitative research focuses on generating meaning and understanding through rich description. It can be a particularly useful approach to studying educational problems that requires developing an understanding of complex social environments and the meaning that people within those environments bring to their experience. Qualitative research differs from quantitative research in several ways. It typically addresses different problems, arises from a different philosophical view of the world, works to achieve different goals, and uses different methods and design. This table illustrates some of the key differences. Focus. Qualitative research focuses on the quality of experience, trying to describe or understand the essence or nature of human experience. Quantitative research, on the other hand, focuses on more measurable factors, asking questions such as how much, how many, or how frequently. Philosophical roots. Qualitative research integrates more subjective human experience, rather than purely objective external reality. It belongs to the school of constructivism or interpretivism. Quantitative research is based on positivism, that holds that physical and social phenomena are independent of the observer, are fairly stable over time and place, and can be objectively observed and quantified. Goals of investigation. The goals of qualitative research are to understand, describe, discover meaning, or generate hypotheses or theory. Quantitative research aims to predict, control, confirm, and test hypotheses. Design characteristics. The designs used in these two types of research are suited to their goals. Qualitative research design is more flexible, evolving, and emergent. while quantitative research design is structured and predetermined. It should be emphasized that the flexible structure of qualitative research in no way suggests that it is less disciplined or easier to design or implement. Quite the contrary. Well-designed, valid, scholarly qualitative research has flexible structure and is designed and implemented with the same care and attention to detail as any well-designed, valid, and scholarly quantitative study. Data collection. In qualitative research, the researcher is the primary instrument, bringing his or her own perspectives to the selection and meaning of data. Quantitative research depends upon external instruments such as tests, surveys, or other tools used to measure and quantify a particular phenomenon. Now that we have discussed the nature of qualitative research and the kinds and forms of qualitative data, it is easier to understand how qualitative research pursues its research goals. In its very earliest stages, qualitative research aims to explore. The goal is to identify patterns, themes, hunches, and initial models that provide an initial understanding of this phenomenon. Description is the heart of qualitative research. The essential characteristics of description is that it conveys information with the detail and specificity necessary to accurately convey the experience. Ultimately, qualitative research strives to produce meaningful interpretations of events and phenomena. With interpretation, the goal is to make sense of what goes on, to reach out for understanding or explanation. Through exploration, description, and interpretation, the qualitative researcher arrives at a complete understanding of a phenomenon in a particular setting or context. Case studies explore a program, an event, an activity, a process, or one or more individuals in depth. Grounded theory derives a general abstract theory of a process, action, or interaction grounded in the views of participants. Ethnography studies an intact cultural group in a natural setting over a prolonged period of time. Phenomenology identifies the essence of human experiences. Narrative approaches study the stories that individuals provide about their lives and experiences. Methodologies come out of different social sciences. For example, ethnography has its roots in anthropology, while grounded theory got its start in sociological research. Phenomenology is rooted in the philosophy of phenomenology. Case study can combine any number of qualitative and quantitative traditions and techniques in order to meet the specific needs of the research situation. Case study is perhaps the most flexible methodology, able to bend several traditions into a valid research design. Consequently, it is among the most widely used research methodologies, particularly for applied research. Qualitative data are typically obtained from sources such as interviews, focus groups, observations of real-life settings, and existing documents. One study may include data from one, several, or all of these sources. For example, a researcher studying a school environment might observe students as they work on daily tasks in the classroom, including students' reactions to the activities, such as body language and facial expressions. A researcher might interview the teacher and students individually, or as part of a small group, about what they were thinking or feeling during the lessons. She may also examine documents such as student work samples and lesson plans to paint a holistic picture of the educational experience. As you plan your research study, you must create a justification for your data collection methods in order to explain why the methods you propose are the most appropriate and most effective way to understand the phenomenon or focus of your study. Before you collect any data for your study, you must receive approval from Walden's Institutional Review Board, or IRB. Visit Walden University's IRB website in order to make sure that you obtain the proper permissions to collect and use data. Qualitative data analysis follows three basic steps. First, the researcher prepares and organizes the data. This could include transcribing interview notes, organizing field notes from observations, or ensuring all documents to be included in the analysis are present and available. Second, the researcher reduces the data by identifying themes, coding data elements, and creating categories. Finally, just as quantitative data must be presented in tables or figures, qualitative data can be presented in narrative form, tables, or visual diagrams. In qualitative research, the data analysis process is flexible and designed to meet each study's needs, but also follows an established protocol and relies on rigorous methodological approaches. The processes of analysis and preparing results are not distinct steps, but are interrelated and often occur simultaneously. In qualitative research, validity is the extent to which the data and the interpretation of the data are credible. Qualitative researchers use different terms to refer to validity. Maxwell uses validity. Lincoln and Guba use trustworthiness, and Creswell uses validation. In addition, these authors use other related subterms. It is important for students to use one recognized author to define all relevant terms for validity. For instance, Lincoln and Guba use 4 additional terms to specify different aspects of trustworthiness: credibility, transferability, dependability, and confirmability. As with any research approach, the researcher must take steps to ensure the validity or accuracy of the research findings. In qualitative research, validity is the extent to which the data and the interpretation of the data are credible. Creswell identifies 8 different strategies used by qualitative researchers to ensure the validity of their findings. Prolonged engagement and persistent data gathering ensure that the researcher does not draw conclusions based upon an isolated idiosyncratic experience with the phenomenon. Using rich, thick description ensures that a sufficient level of detail about the phenomenon studied is included, so that others might draw the same or similar conclusions. Triangulation refers to using multiple data sources in order to build up a complete picture of a phenomenon. Member checking allows the researcher to present the study's findings or conclusions to the original participants so they can comment on whether they believe their perspectives are accurately portrayed. Presenting negative or discrepant information acknowledges observations or findings that run contrary to the study's key themes. Clarifying one's biases as a researcher similarly acknowledges those preconceptions or biases that will inevitably color the study's conclusions. Peer debriefing enlists the aid of a person other than the researcher to review the findings and ensure that they make sense. Finally, an external auditor is someone not familiar with the researcher or the study who can review the study's overall logic, coherence, and consistency. When considering whether a qualitative approach is right for your study, ask yourself the following questions. First, what kind of phenomenon are you planning to study? Is it related to some aspect of human experience that cannot be counted or expressed in numbers? Does it relate to subjective experience, cultural characteristics, personal perspective, idiosyncratic ideas, or comparisons of intangibles? Second, what do you want to know about the phenomenon? Can you find out what you want to know by immersing yourself in the environment in which you will study the phenomenon, by observing or talking to people within that environment, or by studying the materials they have created? Third, why are you doing the study? Are you interested in interpreting, generating meaning, and gaining a holistic view of a phenomenon, rather than in comparing, measuring, or quantifying a phenomenon? If you answered positively to these questions, qualitative research may be the right choice for your study. Qualitative research is a powerful method of studying the implicit as well as the explicit. It accomplishes this by focusing on personal perceptions of the world and the experiences of people as they construct the reality in which they live. Because of these characteristics, qualitative research can be a powerful tool for social change. As a Walden student, social change is a feature of every student capstone. Qualitative methods may help you meet this requirement. Once you have decided to embark upon the process of conducting a qualitative study, use the following steps to get started. First, review research studies that have been conducted on your topic to determine what methods and research traditions were used. Consider the strengths and weaknesses of the various research traditions, data collection methods, and data analysis methods. Next, review the literature on qualitative research methods. Every aspect of your research has a body of literature associated with it. Just as you would not confine yourself to your course textbooks for your review of research on your topic, you should not limit yourself to your course texts for your review of methodological literature. Read broadly and deeply from the scholarly literature to gain expertise in qualitative research. Additional self-paced tutorials have been developed on different methodologies and techniques associated with qualitative research. Make sure you complete all of the self-paced tutorials and review them as often as needed. You will then be prepared to complete a literature review of the specific methodologies and techniques you will use in your study.
Okay, so quite a long video, but I deliberately did not stop the video to or interject because I wanted you guys to concentrate on what you're hearing, all right? In fact, I'm gonna put the link in the chat, because you would have also noted just now from the chat, I indicated, please do not overlook this video. There's a lot of useful information there, but for other reasons you will need it. But you will see just from the conversation that we just had, or the discussion that we're just having, that there are several things that actually come up. You heard me talk about the philosophical roots, constructivism versus post-positivism. You also hear me talk about the designs, though they didn't call them designs, but you saw the 5 designs in this video. And there's several other things that they made mention of. I just wanted to take note at this time that I am still encouraging you to, as a group, start looking at your research project and thinking through what you will do. So if you noted, I've actually asked Aladeen to send an instruction sheet, which we'll talk about next week, or you'll have the chance to delve a little bit more into next week and we'll have a conversation. But what I sat down and did was to develop a statement of research issue, an accompanying set of, well, a purpose statement that is more in keeping with a case study design, and what is one main or general research question, as you saw in the cycle or in the process map, that speaks to case study research, right? And also a research title. Now, I want to start looking at your project and at least develop a statement of research issue. We are, I think, at week 6 of the course, which means that, as them say by quint, then we're gonna be to the end, right? What I don't want is that when we come to the end, everybody's scrambling and stuff. So start looking at what the project is asking of you and start preparing yourself. So in your group, start thinking through, start looking through at the materials that you have. You have enough materials that you can start, right? Thinking through that research that you're gonna do. It's a mixed methods research, right? So start thinking it through from now. At sometime closer down, when we start talking about mixed methods, we're gonna have some conversations, and I'm also going to be trying to understand what are the thought processes that have emerged out of the group conversation. So start thinking through them from now, right? All right, so any questions from the video that we just saw there? Is there anything that you want me to explain for you?
Yes, sir. I didn't get all of the explanation of the strategies to ensure validity.
Okay, so that, let me just, that comes with, right. So what is actually happening here is that you need to ensure that when somebody is looking at your research, they can say, yeah, I see this as being something that I can trust, I can rely on, and so, because one of the things is that with qualitative data, there are some people who say qualitative data is foolishness, and it can't hold water. So as a researcher, you have to make sure that there is enough rigor in what you do. So take, for example, prolonged engagement. What that is really saying is that the researcher spends some time in the field, depending on the genre that you're doing, spend some time in the field. So when we talk about ethnography, for example, you'll see that the researcher actually goes and lives among the research participants, right? So Edward Seago, for example, was a good ethnographer, an anthropologist. So he lived among the people, right? And studied what they did, right? Olive Lewin again was somebody who tried to understand the culture in terms of folk, and so lived and so did prolonged engagement, right? So you'll hear them talking about longitudinal research, right? As part of the process. Thick, rich description. And I want you guys to listen to this carefully, because in the last practicum experience, there were people who collected qualitative data but did not know how to present the data, or did not remember, let me say that, did not remember. And it is why this time around I've changed the strategy, and I'm ensuring that every single jackman, as my grandmother would say, is better equipped. Which is why I'm collecting data and I'm using your own data to show you in a very step-by-step way what you're gonna do. So what this thick, rich description is actually alluding to is the fact that when you collect, or when you do interviews, for example, you're gonna be presenting some of that data in terms of verbatim quotes. And those verbatim quotes give voice or add voice to the participants in your research, right? The triangulation here is suggesting that under different types of triangulation. So you could do what is known as a methods triangulation, where you use interviews and focus groups and document analysis. And if you're doing video clips and you analyze video clips. So just now, I was saying I collected interview data, I collected reflections, I looked at newspaper articles, but I also went as far as to tracking somebody's WhatsApp status, WhatsApp posts, right? So that was a source of data for me, because I was using a case study design, right? So you could triangulate based on the data collection method, you could triangulate based on the theory, or you could triangulate based on people. So depending on what the study is, you could, take for example, you're doing a study and HR practitioners are involved, or people are involved. You could talk to the staff themselves, you could talk to middle managers, senior managers, or different combination of people to get a different perspective. So you could triangulate based on people, right? Member checking is really saying, okay, so after you've collected all of that interview data and you've transcribed it, it is your responsibility of the researcher to bring it back to the participants and say, okay, this is what I transcribed. Please let me know if I transcribed it properly. Because a person could say something in transcription, you interpret it a different way, or they say something. So for example, in the thing I've been doing, the research I've been working on, some people spoke in the Jamaican dialect, and I had to even ensure the spelling, the proper spelling of the dialect. Because depending on where you are, and some of us know, if you're in Kingston, the dialect sounds different from if you're in a different part of the island. And so I had to make sure that the dialect was correct. And I captured what they said and brought it back to them to say, okay, this is what I got from the recording. Is this what you meant? Is it what you want to present as part of the conversation, right? And so that is important, and that's the raw data, you know, because that raw data then has different sets of meaning. And when we talk, when you read Saldana, you'll see, because even, for example, you may be talking to somebody, but you also have to be watching their body language. You have to, so in my study, for example, I studied emotions. And so I listened, for example, at how the teachers said some things. And you could literally hear as they spoke, anger sometimes coming out, or they laughed and you saw that there's happiness, and based on how they said some things, it could be surprise. So they could use the word surprise, but how they said it connoted surprise or suggested anger. They're angry about something, right? But for me, I can't assume it's anger. I have to then try and understand if that was in fact anger that I thought I heard, right? So member checking helps with those things.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
If suppose, for instance, you thought you heard anger and you checked with the person and the person denies that it's anger, but they really are angry. So for instance, they themselves don't know. So because you're talking about emotions, and sometimes people don't understand their own emotions. How do you treat with that?
Well, the truth is though, Olivine, if they say, for example, this is one of the reasons why I remember check, because somebody may say something in an interview, but they do not want that to be presented or represented in the analysis, the write-up and stuff. And so you have to appreciate that they don't want to. So also in the interpretation, if you, for example, think that you heard anger and they say, well, it's not anger, then you just have to accept it that way, right? Because if they say
everything else points to it being anger, body language, words.
The truth though is, which is why it comes back to triangulation. Because if, for example, and so in studying emotions, and this is one of the things that is a limitation of this study that I'm doing, because one of the things I wanted to do was to do observations. And so I've studied this thing called micro expressions, which is really looking at your actual facial movement. And in psychology, there's something that you can see when somebody's angry based on the positioning of certain muscles in their face, or when they're sad or stuff. So one of the things I wanted to actually do was to examine their micro expression. But because of COVID and stuff, I couldn't actually assess what was happening based on their facial expression, because that would have been a useful way to triangulate or to see through a different lens what I heard.
But all right, no, but as you're saying, it's a limitation, because if this validates what the people themselves say that they're experiencing. But if all your triangulation, if the micro expressions showed anger, if all scientific evidence suggested that they were angry, but they themselves say that they were not, so there is some sort of passive aggressive thing going on there.
But listen, in the discussion section, that's a nice place to talk about those things. Yeah. That's a kind of free, I wouldn't say free form, but you can speak about those things. And so, but that is a nice way of going back through that loop for research. Yeah? So the discussion portion is a nice space to say, okay, so from the data, this was said, the participant didn't acknowledge that it was anger, but the literature points to it, it was my interpretation. So in the discussion section, all of that can come out. But you wouldn't necessarily present it as of the results. Yeah? And I see this one says discriminant, I think, discrepant information. Right. So there are some times when you may find that there is not synchrony in what is said, for example, or what you observe, and what is probably said. And this is a good point, Olivia, in terms of what you were just saying, because the person may say, well, that's not what I said, or the tape really said it, or it was captured, but the person says that's what I said, or that's not what I meant. Another good thing, and I've seen it, for example, so somebody in Jamaica, you said make up them face, but them could make up them face for several reasons, So, or we have this thing, and I always laugh at it. In Jamaica, we pout up the mouth, we loud up the mouth and stuff, and you may be jeering somebody, kind of thing, right? But there could be different reasons why somebody have a particular facial expression, and it is useful to say, okay, so explain to me, you know, what is it that I'm seeing? I think I saw X, Y, and Z. Is that what I'm seeing? And the person could say no, you know, kind of thing, right? But it could very much be that what you're seeing, what you're reading, is not necessarily what is being conveyed. Right? So that is, and also some of the times the literature will tell you something, and when you go, for example, you know, it is something different you find, or you're seeing, or comes out of the conversation. Clarifying researchers' bias, and I spoke about this earlier in terms of, as researchers, we have biases, and we have to be reflexive and identify that we have biases and know how to deal with those biases. And one good way is to actually declare those biases. Your peer debriefing is going to be useful. So, for example, asking people to, so coding is one good thing. When you're coding, for example, or developing your codes, have somebody look on and say, okay, so from the data I saw these. So if they're not a priori codes, you may read the data, you may be coding, and you say, okay, this is what I'm seeing emerging from the data. But it makes good sense for others to actually help to settle on some of those codes, right? It's not always a good thing to do it by yourself, and which is why things like inter-rater reliability becomes very useful. The external auditors, so for example, if you're a PhD candidate, for example, or you know, a research student, your supervisor, for example, is a good external auditor, or somebody who's an expert in the field is a good external auditor, right? So and so that presence of somebody looking on at what you're doing, and also you declaring to the person or to a group that this is what I've done and this is how I've done it, helps to validate your, or put strength to your research work, right? So those are some of the validity issues that is being spoken about here, right? You have to make sure that when you present this thing to somebody, they can say, yeah, I'm accepting of what you did, which is why, my gentle people, you'll always hear people talk about one of the first places that people go and read is the method section or the methodology section, because they want to see the rigor that exists in that section and whether or not they can do what you said you have done. So if somebody were to take it, can they follow what you said you did for this process? Yeah, that's important. That's important, especially for qualitative research. When people, for example, donors and funders and stuff, will accept quantitative research, you have to work a little bit harder for them to accept what you've actually come up with in qualitative research, which is why these strategies to ensure the validity are important, right? Any other questions? I'm going to post this in the chat as well, this video by Chris Flip, and he speaks about, so he has several videos on several videos. I'm just gonna put it so you know what it is, right? On the different designs. This one is on case study research, which I find very useful. So I'm gonna, as I said, I'm gonna break now. I want you to take the stuff from the link or the chat. So there are two pieces of work, two articles. Alvin, do you remember if I'd sent these articles to you? Alvin?
Not saying you didn't, but I just took them up off here and put them in our Valley. So they're waiting for people in our Valley.
Ah, great. Great.
Anything that you put here, I'm putting in RVLE.
Great, 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 great. All right. So after the break, I'm gonna actually ask persons to. So I'm gonna put persons in the group, random groups, right? Because I'm not so much particular about putting you back in the same group that you are in. For the project, that's fine. But for these conversations, I think it's useful that people have conversations with you know, with different persons, right? So what you're gonna do is that you're gonna scan through the 2 articles. Those 2 articles are on case study research and also Chris Flip's video on case study research, right? So following the break, I'm gonna put you in breakout rooms. You take about 30 minutes, have some conversation around what you're reading and the video, and then we're gonna regroup, rejoin, and then we're gonna have a bigger conversation, you know, as a class until the end, right? Is that fine?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Okay, good. So it's 7:10 now, so we're gonna break, and at 7, what would that be? 7:25, right? We rejoin, and then I'm gonna put you in the breakout groups. All right? All right, good. So at 7:25, I'll come back.
Sir, do we have those readings already, or you're gonna give them to us when we go in the rooms?
So Olivine just noted that she posted them on RBLE. But if you take them from here,
Yeah.
so what I actually did earlier, so here I found the links for you as well, right? So if you grab them from
the readings that we're going to be discussing, these are the links.
Yes. So I grabbed the link and put them there, as well as I put the name of the article. But they're on RBLE as well. Yeah.
Okay.
So these 2, right, are the articles.
The links work. That's how
Yeah. I just found them. I just did it just as we're gonna start the class. Yeah. All right. So have fun. And you to the breakout rooms. Now, as I'd said before, we ended, what you're gonna be doing is that you're gonna be looking in your group at the 2 articles, right? You may not have the time to read them, you know, word for word and stuff, but scan them through. But you won't have the time now, but I'm encouraging you to read the articles. And this is one of the things that I'm going to be monitoring closer to ensure that you guys read. I know it's not easy. And let me tell you one of my strategies. I just took the break a while ago, and let me tell you what I was doing. So in the midst of everything, I've signed up for an online HR course. Yeah? And it's a very intense course. But a part of my strategy is a lot of books to read and articles and all of that. And what I've done is I've found strategies. So for example, while I'm doing things like in my house, I will actually activate the PDFs and allow Adobe to read the materials for me. So they say men can multitask, but I don't believe so. Because while I'm doing things, I'm listening to the articles, and I'm also having the PDF read my textbook for me, and I'm listening the textbook, right? So I'm learning that way while I'm doing something, and so that could be a strategy that you guys, you know, take on. So I hear people struggling over reading the articles because they're too long. Use Adobe. Use the PDF reader function in Adobe. It does it for you, right? So that's one good thing. But you have to read though. Research requires reading And it's a marriage. It's a marriage. And in order for it to work, you have to be committed to reading. Right? So reading is the partner. And in order for it to work, you have to grow to love that partner. Right? So yeah. All right. So I'm gonna assign you to different rooms. As I said, what you're gonna do is just look through the article, right? There are useful things that you'll actually find there, and when we come back, we're gonna have a discussion. So I'm gonna assign you 30 minutes to have conversations with your colleagues, which would mean you could review the articles together, talk about it, anything that jumps out on you that is interesting, that you probably think is worth mentioning, having a conversation about, watch Chris Clip's video, take notes, whatever, right? And when we come back, we'll have a general discussion. Right? Does that sound okay?
Sir, which one of the, we should look at both of the articles you said, or just one? Both? Okay.
Both
All
of
right,
them.
cool.
Both of them. But as I say, you won't have the time to read all of them.
Yeah.
What you'll do is scan them through, and I'm sure that you'll start picking up some things from our conversation, but also just quickly picking up something and recognize that the literature across speak to some things. And also the video that Chris Flip will also do is reinforcing some other things about case study design. So when we come back, we're gonna have a conversation, and then we'll talk some more about case study design. For me, case study design is one that is not appreciated by all researchers and people in general, but I find it a very versatile research design and can also be used for quantitative research as well, right? I tend to like case study design because of its versatility, right? But you have to understand, if you're using case study, you have to understand some of the basic tenets of case study research or case study design. So for example, you're gonna see information about the sample size, the information about when we talk about bounding case study, what does it mean to bound the case study? You have different types of case study. So you have single case study, multiple case study, depending on who you're reading. So if you're reading about yin, for example, yin and stakes takes a different approach to case study. But when you look through it in with a bigger microscope, they're kind of suggesting the same thing. Again, if you're doing case study, the research questions will sound different from other qualitative research design. So those are some of the things that literature will actually point out for you. Yeah? All right, so breakout room time. So I'm gonna put you there and then you join the breakout rooms. I'm gonna visit the rooms at interval as well. All right?
Hello?
Hello,
Hi. How are you?
I'm well, thank you. And you?
Good. Not too bad at all, man. Not too bad. Not too bad at all.
Anyone else in the room?
See. All right. So we're gonna start off with the article from, that's the article on redefining case study.
There are other
Rob.
persons in the room?
Yeah. Oh, forgot about that. Who else? Look at the participants. Oh, we have Olivina, Nicole's iPhone. Nicole's iPhone. Who is Nicole? Is this Spike?
Yes, Drew.
Oh, hi. Hi.
Hey.
Welcome everyone to our group. So we're going to look at the first, and Olivine is here also. We're going to look at redefining case study. First, the article by Rob and Samia. You can just start off by looking at the abstract and then read the summary or the conclusion to kind of get an idea of what's up. So yeah, can take like 5 minutes, 5 to 7 minutes, and just read that so kind of a general idea of what the article is saying.
Okay.
And so you have to put on a critical thinking cap to say, okay, what do I believe? Right? And you also need to look at who is writing it. So I was just talking to the other guys in the other group. So when you talk about case study, there are some leading writers in case study design. So Yin, Stakes, Cresswell, for example, are some of the leaders. So you then have to look at who are they writing, and also are they leaning towards Yin and Stakes, for example. Look at the reference list, for example. Who are they citing? Right?
As
All
I
right.
said, guys, we need to go back and read the article properly. No, none of us has read it properly, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm
Yeah.
just saying we
And
need
some
to
of the
go
times
back
it
and
means
do that.
reading several times and trying to digest it and see, is this making sense? Yeah. So you have to question yourself some of the times.
But I
Because
tell
some
you
of
the
the times, you
truth,
know,
I tell you the truth though, that not because Cresswell and those guys have written, would I swallow what they said? I would actually be intrigued by these guys, this new definition. Of course, as I said, we have to understand what they're actually saying. But I would be interested to really sit and explore what they're saying.
which is why I'm saying they're pushing the boundaries. They're
Yeah,
pushing the
yeah.
boundaries. And so they will challenge. And Olivine, we, for example, we're on the same stage. Cresswell and Oebuze
Yes.
not contradicts, but they defend their stance on mixed methods, and they're looking through two different lenses on some of the same things. Yeah. And they're prominent writers here. And again, that is what is nice about the research and the landscape, because it is evolving. And so, you know, there's always a spark, there's always a fire that is there. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we're gonna hop into our next group.
Okay. So we can actually look at the next one now. Case study as research
Action. All right. So we're still having the discussion on case studies. So I just showed the research process. So this last column is the column of focus for this conversation on case study. So you will actually know that in this section it speaks about the focus being developing in-depth analysis.
Sorry, you're not sharing your screen.
Yeah, you're not sharing your screen, no.
All right, good. Screen share. PowerPoint. All right. See now? Seeing screen now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. So let me make it clear. Right. So I was saying this column case study is the column of focus for this conversation. And so you would have heard from both probably Chris Phipps' video and the one before that you can actually have single case studies or multiple case studies. And this is the rhetoric that Ying speaks. For example, when we talk about stakes, then you hear him talk about holistic, for example. Right? So the rhetoric or the language that is used different, but pretty much, you know, them mistake. Right? You'll also note from this matrix here that, and these are the different philosophical assumptions. So Geo actually made mention of biography, which is the same thing as narrative, right? But here, this matrix actually gives the evolution of the different designs. And so it's a case study. It came out or it evolved out of political science as well as sociology, right? I don't remember which group it was. I think it was group 3 or one of them. And I joined the conversation and we were talking about different data collection methods. And I said earlier that I tend to fancy case studies, well, based on what you're doing, because it allows you to collect data using different methods. So it could be interviews, observations. You could go on Facebook and look what people are saying. You could look at their pictures, for example. You could look at their WhatsApp posts. You could go on Instagram. You could go on whatever it is. You could analyze a video. You could look in the newspapers. You could look in archival material, whatever it is. You could listen to music, for example, something sound, look at a painting, whatever it is. So the sources of data collection are different. It could mean an accident and you look at the accident scene for evidence. It just varies. It just varies, right? So that's one of the beauties of using the case study approach, because the methods of data collection, they're just so wide and varied, right? So here it says multiple sources, documents, archival records, interviews, observation, physical artifacts, and it could go on, right? As with some of the others. Usually with case studies, and this is one of the things which it isn't said here, but if you think about the sample, for example, so here we recognize that we could either be looking at a single case or multiple cases. The truth, as you see here from the data collection method, is that you could be swamped with a lot of data that you then have to analyze and make meaning of. So you have to balance or take into consideration the different data collection sources and the number of participants that you're going to be using. So if you read, for example, Cresswell, he has certain suggestions about the number of cases that you use, right? And again, depending on what you use, so some of the times it's ideal to use 6 or so cases. Some of the times it could mean 3, 4, depending on what you use. Again, part of the sampling technique for qualitative research in general is a purposive or purposely selecting your participants, right? As opposed to quantitative research where you may be using random sampling and all those other things. For qualitative research, predominantly, you would use purposive sampling. Now that I'm saying that that's the only sampling technique that is available, but purposive sampling, which really much just means you purpose select the participant because there is, you know, information that can be gained from talking to them, right? Or collecting data from them. You purposely go because you know that they have some information that could give you, or you could find, right? The data analysis and this, let me see how to express this. So depending on the research design, as you're seeing here, the way you analyze the data is different, right? So for case studies, you will find that you first collect all of the data. So those people who I've been dialoguing with. So the other people, let me tell you what I've asked them to do. I've asked them to send me voice notes responding to the questions on the question sheet, right? So on the question sheet, I've asked 3 interview questions. What was your reason for enrolling in the HRD program? How would you describe your learning experience since the beginning of the course? And what do you believe are some of the consequences on your learning if COVID-19 existed in the next year or 2? And what they've done so far for me is to send me voice notes with those responses, right? What I'm going to do is that I'm going to transcribe. So I'm going to use an online tool to transcribe that data, to put it in text. And then I'm going to go through and first look through and develop some codes. And from the codes, I'm going to develop categories, and then I'm going to develop themes. So it's a first way of sorting things, and then go back and do some fine sorting, and then some further fine sorting. And so at the end of the day, I'm going to look at, okay, so what's the common theme that I'm hearing from all of these people? So it's a data reduction strategy, right? So it's first sorting through, sifting through, you know, a whole pile of stuff, kind of reducing, and then you look back through and then go through a further process. So if we use an example of a whole bucket of fruits, everything mixed up, and some ripe and some green and some squash up and some have worm and all of those things. The objective is to find the ones that are good the ones that you can sell, right? So remember, I know we have a whole bucket of mangoes, for example. And so we're gonna go through and we're gonna say, okay, we're gonna sort those that are ripe from the ones that are green. So we're gonna separate them. So that's one round. But in separating the ripe ones, you will find that some of them squeeze up. And you don't want to sell the squeeze up one, but some of them may still be firm, but you know they have blemishes, which means that you're gonna do some further fine sorting, right? And ultimately, what you want to find is those that are saleable. And so you're looking at, oh, they're ripe, but the quality of them look nice and shine and all of that, and they are presentable for sale. And it's the same thing when we collect a whole mass of data. What we're doing is that we're weeding through, we're sifting through. So we're looking at what are some of the codes, what are the categories, what are the themes that can emerge out of this data. I encourage you to read well, not necessarily read through the entire thing, but to look through Sal Daniels' text, right? What I've done, as I've just explained to you, is that I've actually activated my PDF reader and I've allowed it to read through for me. So I just listen and it is read through for me, right? It is, and Olivine is on this chat. Olivine, well, you probably would know, and even for the OB, the PhD OB candidates, Olivine, if they don't yet know about Sal Daniels' book, it is a good read.
No man, I gave it to them already. You had recommended it and I gave it to them already.
It is a good read. It is what I used for my PhD. So one of the things I'm looking at is emotions, and it actually tells you how to code for emotions. But there are other types of codes that you develop. So like descriptive codes. So like a part of your thing is looking at the description. So you'd code for like the age group of the person, you know, and some other things, male, female, the situation, the snack. And it gives you different types of coding. So what Saldana did was went into the literature and did a meta-analysis and pulled all the different types of coding strategies and put them in this one book. That anybody who's researching can then go to that as the coding Bible. And you get different types of coding strategies that you can use. You can't use all of them, but it shows you and it gives you practical examples of different types of coding strategies that you can use, right? And then it goes even further to show you how you develop to the point of doing your writing upon stuff. Very good, right? So even for you guys, as you do your practicum, you will need to draw on Sal Daniels' work. And I know Grace Martin Hall will be asking you, so how do you come up with your categories and your ultimate theme? How do you analyze this data? So I'm saying it publicly on this chat that you need to look at Sal Daniels' work because that will help you in coding your data, right? In terms of how you present the data, so here for the narrative form, it is in-depth study of the case study or the cases. So if you read some more, you will recognize, and I kind of introduce this at some point, that when we're talking about case, a case could differ. So a case could be, so this class, for example, is a good example of a case, but you could also be interested in finding out the decision-making process of this class or the decision that persons have made to enroll in this program. And so the decision-making process could be your unit of analysis. So I could actually do a research. So this research problem that I've actually set out here is one that anybody could take up. In fact, if anybody is so interested, it could be your research project. It could be reformulated to become a part of your research project, and it could be explored. It could be done through a mixed methods lens, right? So the point I'm making there is that you have to think through, okay, so what's my case study and what is going to be my unit of analysis? What exactly am I studying? Am I studying the individual, or am I studying the decision-making process, or other things that went into the research, right? It is not the easiest thing to identify what is your case study and also what is your unit of analysis. And what it means is reading becomes very important. Reading and looking at other examples. I make no bones about it. That is exactly what I did in order to help me to identify what is my case study, because I have a second supervisor there and she will grill you, and she is a methodologist. So she will tell you, what you're saying as your case study and your unit of analysis, it isn't so. And she knows yin and sticks like the back of her hand. And she'll tell you what you've identified as your case study and your unit of analysis is not so. So I'm just saying that if you intend to do PhD, for those of you who are, you know, bold enough, these are some of the things that you have to be able to defend. What's my case? What's my unit of analysis, for example? Yeah. So these are some of the things, as you see in this matrix here, that you will go through in the literature, right? This, I'll share the PowerPoint with you so you'll be able to see this. And then these are just some reminders that you have in your set of stuff in RVLE template for research problem and statement of the research, purpose statements, research questions, sample size and stuff, which is in Saldana, the analysis which is in Saldana. Right? Please go and check the posts in in RVLE and add to the discussion. As Olivine sent out, I'm going to be looking at the discussion, and it will be a part of your grades that will form a part of your in-class grade. Begin to review the past exam questions. Please take note of your in-class activity for next week, and I've just posted these two articles in the chat for you, which will now, you know, go through for the rest of the class to, you know, just have a conversation on what are some of the things that really jumped out on us. I'll take the case study first, and so I'll go with group 1 or breakout group 1 to just give me some insights on what you gathered from what Chris was talking about. So this week, I noted who are the persons in breakout room 1. So those persons are Aline, Giselle, Lorenzo, Marsha, Sasha. Those are the persons on the floor now. So just tell me some of the things that jumped out on you from Chris Phillips' video. So anybody can jump in now. Anybody from that group? All right, Lorenzo?
Yes, sir.
Do you want to start a conversation?
Well, I never got to watch the video. So.
Anybody from the group watched it? Marjorie? Did you watch Chris's video?
Sir, I didn't get to watch the YouTube video.
Sasha?
Yes, sir. I didn't get to watch the video, just a little part of it. That was speaking to basically what is a case study.
which is kind of the point I just left off there. It's important to understand what is a case study and also what's a unit of analysis. What exactly are you analyzing? Because when you're coding, for example, those things are things that become useful. Now, I'm also saying this because if, for example, in your practicum, you don't want to look, you're like, you know, like you don't know what you're talking about. And so, for example, when you write up Mrs. Martin Hall and you say, okay, your intervention was in X, Y, and Z company, for example, the question is, okay, so is that the case study, or is your focus on the actual individuals within that organization? So what's the case? Is it the organization that's the case, or is it the individuals within the case? And the other question is, so what exactly are you analyzing? Is it the recruitment process, or is it the decision making that goes into the process? What exactly are you analyzing? Yeah? So you have to be able to explain to the reader what exactly is your focus, right? So I'll encourage you guys to to listen that video for many reasons. All right, so group 2, this one has Bell, Grant, Marsha, Dylan, Montague. Did anybody read the case? Not read the case, watch the video from this group?
Yes, we watched it, sir.
All right, what was the insight? Was there anything that jumped out?
Well, it gave us the types of case studies. And as I was saying earlier, you have the single instrumental. That one is the one that you do if you have no other information to work with. So you use that, you focus on that one. You have the collective where you use other case studies, and intrinsic where the case itself is studied without first focusing on the case. I'm not sure I'm understanding that point.
So what do you say?
It says the researcher studies the case itself without first focusing on the case. I don't really understand what that is saying.
I think it's a phenomenon.
Go back to that.
If I may, Marsha.
Yeah.
I think you could correct that to say the researcher studies the case itself without first focusing on the issue.
I say it never make any sense to me. Thanks.
And it's issue or concern.
Right. So the researcher wouldn't think about the issue first.
Mm-hmm.
They would really examine the case first.
The case, yeah.
And then focus on the issue.
So from looking at the case, they would deduce what the issue is then.
Yes. Is that right, sir? That's my understanding.
Right. Or so earlier as we saw in the cycle, it could then it's almost like scoping out the joint. And then you've gotten some information and you can delve in some more.
Oh, and another point with the single instrumental case, if to validate it, you do triangulation. So you use several methods.
Right.
That is the only one available.
So take note. It's just a matter of the terminologies, you know, because Yin speaks about single case study and multiple case study. So what Chris leaned more on stakes, who's the other writer or another writer of case studies.
Okay.
The design. So the terminologies may sound a little bit, you know, different, but when you read through, they're really referring to the same. Is either that it is single or multiple. So one case or multiple cases.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yes, sir.
And he also spoke about intrinsic is one of the rare instances, like a tsunami at a specific place.
Yeah, yeah. Because that's the other thing to take note of, people, that, and Yin, for example, speaks about a case study being a case study, and I've never forgotten I've never forgotten. Say my second supervisor, she was in the School of Education. What happens is that we do graduate research, and somebody was preparing to do her upgrade, I think, and the person came on and was talking about case study, and she says, how do you define a case study? Because there are some specific criteria that helps define a case study. And then, you know, she went on because the person did not clearly think through those. And one of the things she was looking at was that it should be bounded in time, for example, space and time, meaning that a tsunami has taken place at a specific time, right? Meaning a specific year, a specific month, a specific day, a specific hour,
a specific region.
A specific region. So what I was actually mentioning there was a time, but also this space or the context. So the region would be the space. And so those are some of the things. So you look at. So for example, we in HR, we're talking about HR now. And if we're thinking about, say, an incident that took place in an organization, it could mean that incident is a one-off incident. And so it is a case, right? It could be seen as a case. And so it could be bounded by time as well as space, which means it took place at a particular point in time within a particular department or at a particular location. So if the organization has several locations, it took place at this location at this particular time of the day or of the year or of the month, right? And we may never see another occurrence of that thing, right? Which also means the participants to that case study are carefully selected. And if you noted, for example, I spoke about purposive sampling or purposive sampling, because somebody who, for example, was not there when the incident took place cannot, for example, be a part of the investigation. They weren't there, and so they can't testify, they can't give evidence. So you would have to purposely select the participants of this research or of this investigation, people who saw, people who are first-hand witnesses. You can't take the hearsay people for this one, right? So you have to carefully select those who are going to be contributors to this case study. Also, you have to carefully select, so what exactly is my focus here? What exactly is the focus of the investigation? Is it something that happened 2 years ago that is not a part of this incident right now? Am I going to focus on that, or am I going to focus on the incident at hand? So you have to then think about what exactly am I going to analyze? Yes, to answer the research question, or if we're looking at it through HR lens or IR lens, to answer the question of, okay, is this employee culpable or not? Right? And so these are some of the practical ways of how we could employ this case study methodology that we're talking about. So when we're doing a disciplinary hearing, for example, or we have a disciplinary hearing in front of us, it's a case study approach that we're taking. And from the point of an investigation, straight down to the point of determining whether or not a separation should take place, it involves some research. So we just spoke about the different methods of data collection that are at play. We could be doing interviews, we could be looking at performance records, we could be looking at the surveillance camera, we could be doing observation, different things. We could be collecting data through different sources or different methods, yes, to come to that final conclusion. Again, we could be triangulating the sources. So we're going to be talking out to the incumbent themselves, talking to co-workers, talking to the supervisors, talking to the union. As we just mentioned about the validation, but also how do you, for example, you know, interpret some things that the person says, right? Who watches over the process to ensure that there's transparency and there's no foul play in the data that is collected? Because we have to make sure that in this instance that the data is collected, it is clean, and it is kept secured throughout the entire process, right? So for those people who can't understand what these people are talking about in terms of the big word and the highfalutin, it is this whole thing that we're talking about is all around us. But they may be writing in highfalutin language and stuff, but if we strip it down, break it down, it's at play. COVID, for example, it is a good example of a case study. And so even as HR, some of the decisions that we make, the decision for work from home, for example, right? These are some perfect examples. We don't know if COVID is going to exist in the next year or two. Just like I said to people, there's one point in the 1815 or so, when there was an outbreak of cholera. We've seen this thing before in a different form. So there was something called cholera before that took the world by surprise, a waterborne thing. And a good portion of the global population died, and a quarter of Jamaica's population died from cholera. But we bounced back. And so cholera is a case, can be seen as a case study, right? So these things are all around us. That's the point I'm making. All right. So my point here is go and watch Chris Flip's video because it's useful. And as I posted in the chat, Chris's video, I like to use Chris's video for different reasons, including assessments. Yeah. All right. So let me hear what were some of the conversations that arose out of the article. So I'm going to take people from group 3, and those people would be Debbie, Giovanni, Nicole, Titania, or yes, Titania, yes, and Olivine sat in on that group. So I joined that group and I heard a useful conversation, right? I wanted to throw it out to the rest of the group, to the rest of the group people.
Okay, so basically we reviewed the first article. First article reviewed was the one about case study. Let me
redefining case study.
Yeah, redefining case study, which was very interesting for my group because it kind of gave you a different kind of view on case studies. We had a little well, it was hard. Well, it was interesting, and some of us didn't really get most of it. And there was a part that sticked out about it. How the what's the word, the paradigmic
paradigm.
The paradigm of a case study, how you can use case studies in different disciplines, and so that was interesting for us. Debbie, you'd like to add anything?
Before Debbie comes on, it's one of the things that when we're going in the breakout group, I said it's one of the things with case studies that it is kind of just so flexible that it can be used both quantitative as well as qualitative, or even mixed, and it can be used across disciplines as well.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
What the article was proposing is that unlike other
writers who would probably put case study in a fixed definition, they're proposing that it fits no one definition. So it's not a method, it's not a methodology, it's not a research design. They're proposing that other writers might define it in those constructs because of the different things that you can use it to do. But it is not one thing. It encompasses everything, every one of those things that you could think of. And so the writers came up with a very, very deep definition of it. I can't remember the definition right now, but the definition is basically saying it encapsulates everything that you can think of. It covers everything.
So did you guys observe my slide, and when I said list the different, so I used the word paradigm, I use the word genre, I use the word design. When we're watching the video, you saw the word tradition. So that's the point, that there isn't any one word, and depending on who you're reading, you will see that the rhetoric differs, and it is for that reason. It's for that reason, right? So different people have different, and even in research in general. So even as you noted in that video, you saw them talk about case study methodology or methodological tradition, right?
Yes.
Which is why I keep saying, for example, for the purpose of this conversation, when we talk about methodology, this is what we're talking about. I want to talk about methods, this is what we're talking about. Because depending on who you're reading, you will see that the terminology, the expressions differ, and you could easily get confused. Easily get confused. Yeah? With this. Yes, but that writer is, I think, pushing the envelope. But I've seen other writers who actually argue that case study is not only a design, but you could look at it as a methodology. The other one that you come across, which kind of has a kind of similar characteristics, is grounded theory. But we're not talking about that yet. But yes, you'll see it as a design. You could see it as a methodology, separate from qualitative research in a broader sense. You could see it as other things. Yeah?
And that's what this article was arguing. They did put forward how other researchers may view it or define it under each of those concepts. But they're saying that they push the envelope to say it cannot be in any one fixed area. It cannot be just fixed under methodology or method or research design, because it takes into consideration so many different things. It cover all of those, whether it's a method, a methodology, or a research design.
And it is for that reason why, for example, you in the next article, let me see what is the name of that person. In the article that is written, the one that says case study, a research method,
yes,
you will actually come to realize that the argument there is that people stay away from case study, or feels that qualitative or case study isn't solid. Yeah?
Say that again, sir.
So case study, for some people, as opposed to some of the other designs and stuff, they see it as more fluid. And so for some people, it is less accepting or acceptable, because it just seems so lax and loose and everything could work.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's one of the disadvantages that are put forward for using case study.
A point they made though, sir, which I'm still trying to envision, because I learn better when I visualize, is where they said that they define it. They said it's not exclusively about revealing the case itself, but it is about the unit of analysis being discovered or constructed as you go along.
Yeah,
So
that
you don't go in with the focus of your research. It's after you're in it, then all these things start to unfold, and you figure out what is going to be your unit of measurement, or what you're going to be analyzing.
So if you also recall, I'd said at one point that with qualitative research, you set out to build theory, right? And also in the conversation, I'd said that there is a recursive element of qualitative research. Because as you are there in the field, you probably will hear something, see something, get some insight, and that just triggers off a light bulb and it sends you down a rabbit hole, right? And so what the literature may have guided you to initially, you then recognize that, having come into the field, you have a better understanding. And so what you thought was the thing that you're actually analyzing somewhat shifts. Or it probably could stay the same, but a different dimension is added to it. So let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. In this research that I'm wrapping up, one of the things that jumped out on me in a very pronounced way, but I never saw it, was classism. Classism, right? So I'm sitting on to study emotions. But as I listened to the conversations and stuff, the whole thing of uptown versus downtown started coming out. And I said, oh. And then in listening it, I hear, for example, the teachers speak about how the students ghettoize them. So here it is that you have the so-called uptown teachers or the suburban teachers, and they have to make that transition to how it is that they are going to deal and cope and to relate to these students, for example, right? And then I also went and watched a YouTube video with this guy at Calabar, for example, threatening a teacher. And the essence of why he was threatening a teacher was insane. The teacher going like she's tush and she's nice because she drive up big vehicle and she come from uptown and stuff. And I looked at that as well, and then in one instance, one teacher said, you know, we have teachers who they know the content, but they have to go back to teacher training school because they're unpolished. And so part of what she was talking about was the teachers who come from the inner city and how they relate and the experiences and stuff. And what that said to me is that, oh, so classism and all of that is a big divide. And so it then plays out in terms of the emotions that are expressed in the school setting. I never saw that. The literature never told me about that in the way I found it out in this study. And so that is part of what they're talking about. So a part of my unit is analysis, probably not for this research, but certainly for other research, will change here or will be extended.
Sir, so if I let me see if I understand you. So you can start out with a research question, a specific research question, you're saying. And even though it's a specific research question and you're going in looking for a specific...
Well, let me not even say a specific research question, because here, let me just share back screen. You'll note that this process map starts with a general research question.
Yes.
A general research question, because it could be subject to change. So if you remember also in the conversation about quantitative research, I was saying what is always useful is to try and refine your research question before you start the data collection and stuff, because you don't want to keep shifting the goalposts. With qualitative research, you can go in and have a general research question or a general hunch, and So the literature could guide you some of the times, or your own intuition or your own observation or something that you've heard could guide you, right? So one of the other things that we're revealing with my study is that I went in and I had to guard my bias, because I went in kind of very bitter with this high school teacher in terms of how she used to treat us bad and stuff. Having gone into the research and having understood what teachers experience, my whole thought process about this teacher started changing, and I said, oh, the shoe is on the other foot, and I probably cannot understand what this woman was experiencing, why she came to the class and she behaved the way she behaved with us. So it's almost like the penny dropped, and I'm now starting to understand. She may never have wanted to behave that way, but years of going through the same thing, class after class, cohort after class, cohort and stuff, she probably had no other way of expressing herself. And so how we took it, I took it, for example, and it did scar me. It did scar me to this day. But then, having done this research, I'm coming out with a different thought process. And so some of the anger and some of the bitterness that I started out with has tempered down significantly to the side where I'm seeing it through a different lens. So again, my focus could change based on what I'm seeing. And so I could then be asking a whole different set of research questions that I didn't go into research with, or even I wasn't even thinking about those things, having gone into the research. So that's part of the flexibility as well of doing qualitative research, that it allows for a constant evolution as you understand and as things unfold in the research process. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
Good. All right. So I notice it's time has exhausted on us, but I think good conversation. What I want you guys to do is continue to do the reading. Take it in bite size, in chunks. Think about going to the gym, right? Or you don't even have to go to the gym, but you want to stay fit and in good shape and stuff, and you don't go and do all sorts of exercise at once. So it may mean you jog on the spot, or if you don't want to jog, you start walking on the spot, and then you increase that routine by probably say jogging kind of thing, and you may be jogging for 1 hour, no, well, not every 1 hour, 50 minutes for every week, and you start increasing it. It's the same way I wanted to take the reading, right? Take it in bite size. But what you're doing is that you're strengthening your research muscle. And as you do that exercise, you will come to appreciate some of the things. It will not come all at once, and you will find big words and all of those things. I come across it every day, and there's some articles I have to read 3 and 4 and 5 times before I understand. So it's not about you. It's just what research is. And some you have to put it down, and it takes you a whole week, a whole month to understand what it is saying. Don't give up. Don't give up. Perseverance. Yeah? So I told you last week, if I can do it, you can do it too. Right? So, that's the works. That's the works. Yeah? Research, it don't come overnight. It is a discipline, and it requires, incremental doing and discipline. Yeah, but it will make you better. It will make you better, over a period of time. And even just in your work in general, it allows you to pay close attention to the things that you do. Right? So next week when we come back to the conversation, we're going to talk about 2 other designs. And those will be grounded theory and ethnography, right? And the following week, we'll talk about phenomenology and narrative. And then we'll go into mixed methods. I still implore you to start reading your project and start thinking through, at least as a group, try to craft your statement of research problem, right? I've given you a good, what I think a start in terms of how your research problem could look, right? So at least craft your research problem and let us start the conversation, all right? Please remember to post in the discussion forum in Orville. I'll be going there to look at what is being said, all right? Any parting words?
Sorry, you require PowerPoint for the presentation?
I didn't hear that.
You require a PowerPoint presentation for the group work.
Do you require a PowerPoint presentation for the group work?
Which of the group work? The one for next week?
Yes, sir.
No. No, it's gonna be, no. Spare yourself. Just have the conversation, make sure that you have some discussion, right? And you're able to answer the question, right? But I know we're all busy, you know. We are busy, and to the PowerPoint, it may eat up some of our points, some of our things, right? So no, what you guys need to know though, and it is for a reason, it's for a reason why I have done this assignment as well. Because when you're doing practicum, a part of the ethical consideration is that if you're doing qualitative or quantitative research, you must have your participants consent to being a part of your practicum experience. You must. So you also must develop a consent form that you're going to issue to them. You notice, for example, well, in the thing I showed you last week, I don't recall that the student had a consent form, which is not good ethical consideration. So which is why I'm bringing you to this rigor, right? So have the conversation, right? All right,
Sir,
you can also, yes.
Sir, I need you to clarify something for me.
With what?
Are you hearing me?
Yeah, man.
Sir, the second part of the question for next week, are we supposed to come up with other questions or just use the 3 questions that you gave us?
So you need to include, yes, so you need to come up with other questions. So think about you're doing an interview. So you're the researcher here, you're going to do an interview. What are the questions that you're going to ask the interviewee? So I've given you 3.
Okay.
But you will also have to develop a protocol. Yes, so using the same scenario here, you're pretending that you're the interviewer and you're going to develop an interview guide, right? So what other interview questions will you need to ask? That will give you data to answer the main research question, right? So the 3 interview questions here are going to be a part of your interview protocol. What I'm helping you to appreciate is that there is an instrument that you need to develop when you're doing interviews. You just don't go just off the fly and do the interviews. You need to develop a protocol which you also pilot before you actually do the real thing, right? So for your practicum, you also need to do this as well. So it is strengthening that muscle. Yeah?
Okay, sir.
Yeah. Any other questions before we part for this week?
Sir, I have a question that I particular to research paper, and I don't know if you could give me at least 3 minutes of your time after the class, please.
Which one? The group
Yes.
thing?
Yes, sir.
Sure. For those who want to, for those who you know want to go on. Well, the class is officially ended, so Olivia, you can, you know, stop the recording and stuff. I'll stick around and people can ask me questions. So Debbie, go ahead.
All right. I don't want to hold up the class unless a person can.
No. The class is done. Class is done. So you have the floor now.
All right. So we were discussing coming up with a mixed method research question. Right? Okay.
Right. I hear you mention topic, and I'll quickly say that the topic and title are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So for example, the scenario that I've given you here, the overarching thing is the COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah, is the learning experience, and COVID will come in. For the topic, you could look at something in terms of performance management, or it could be recruitment and selection, or it could be capacity development or talent management, or it could be what else? Another function of HR, right?
Yes.
Because all of these things, you know, are worth researching. Employee engagement, for example. Employee satisfaction, right?
Yes.
So those are all things that are worth researching. So for example, I've been thinking a lot about in the next 5 to 10 years, are we going to see the same jobs that we now, you know of? And the quick question is no. And we see it right in front of our eyes, right?
Yes.
So there is going to be an evolution in jobs. And what it also means is that there's going to be a whole process of reskilling people to take on those new jobs, to take on those new functions and stuff. The question is, do we know what those new jobs are? Is it worth researching what those new jobs are? Yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So what it then means is that we have to do some analysis of the environment in which we're operating in as human resource professionals and practitioners, right? But we don't also have it in our head. So if we, for example, look at an industry. So I work with OUR, and one of the things I've had to be thinking through in a very serious way is, so we have engineers, but are the engineers going to be the same type of engineers that they left school with, that they left school being? No, because right now we're thinking of alternate sources of energy. So we're using gas and all of that thing, but we see electric cars coming in. We see renewable energy and all of those type of things. What the truth is, our engineers are the movers and shakers, and also to some degree we're behind as a so-called third world country. So when we talk about, for example, electric cars and driverless cars, and people say, no, something not going on, there's something there. Me not. Tell you what, the same way as we now embrace cell phones, yeah, and the latest cell phones, it is the same way that we're going to embrace driverless cars. It's the same way that we're going to embrace electric cars. And if we don't, we're going to be left behind. Now the question is, who are the persons who are conceptualizing these cars? Who are the persons who are regulating, for example, you know, these cars being manufactured and stuff? It is the same human resource that we have. The point for going through all of that is that jobs are going to evolve. Some jobs are going to be no longer. And I don't think even here in Jamaica, there is enough research on how jobs are going to be changing and what it is going to mean to reskill our people to take up those jobs. So let me tell you something else. And Bruce Golding, when he was Prime Minister, I listened to him and went in there. So he made a statement that, listen, in terms of planning and stuff, we have a lot, and we sit at UA now. So when graduation time, which faculty graduate, which faculty push out a lot of the people then? Social sciences.
Yes.
And also there are some programs that when you look in the graduation book, for example, a whole host of people graduating from certain things. So management studies, for example, accounting, and some of those other areas. Law, for example, a whole lot of people studying law. What are we going to do so much lawyer? Eh? And there are some areas that are, you can't find people. So like now I'm trying to, in my organization, trying to find an information security officer. And we've been scoring the market, and we can't find. And I've been talking to other people and they say, you know, it's not only your problem, you know, but it's an industry problem. Now, the truth is that with all of this technology around us, but no other time do we need these people who are capable of understanding the information security about the infrastructure that we're putting in. Because we have the people who hacking left, right, and center. And so we're vulnerable. But we don't have the right skilled people. Right?
All right, so sorry, but back to the original question though. You're making the point that the topic is different from the title.
Yes.
So you gave the example that the topic would be the general area of focus.
Mm-hmm.
So the title would, give me an example of what the title would be in that sense. Because you gave the example that learning experience would be the topic.
But if you notice here, what I've done is that I've said, I'm exploring the learning experiences in the Masters of Science. So I've made it specific. Mm-hmm. So it's not learning experience for every program in UA. Okay. Learning experience in the Masters in Human Resource Development program is not the diploma program, is not BSc program, is not a PhD program. It is this particular one.
Yes.
Right? For which students? So you see, so in class I'd mentioned something. When you're looking at your title and other things, you're looking at different things. So here you can identify who are the participants, what's the research site or location, and what is it that is under study. So the phenomenon here is a learning experience for the participants, persons in the Masters in HRD program, where University of West Indies.
Okay.
Uh-huh. Right. You've narrowed down that broad topic area into a research title that is manageable.
Right.
Right? But I always tell people that I don't want to focus on topic and title and well more title. Right? What is important is for you to try and articulate a problem or an issue at play. So even this that I've sat down and developed, I'm seeing that COVID, for example. So some people, this thing of online learning took them by storm. Mm-hmm. And so as I reflect on even you people, I was saying to myself, but I don't know that you people even have met each other. So some of you probably talking to each other, but you don't even know how the person look. Right?
Yeah.
And different things. Or you may be somebody who does not like technology or appreciate technology, or you may live in an area where your internet connectivity is good kind of thing.
Yeah.
All of those things, and those things are actually going to be part and parcel of what may influence your learning experience. Now, notice I'm saying, you know, influencing, and it could be influencing it in positive or negative ways, because online learning could be the best thing ever for some people, while it could be the worst thing ever for some people.
So the problem must be something negative, because it must be something you're trying to.
No. It could also be something worth understanding.
Okay.
So it could be something that you don't know anything about, right? So notice I'm saying I'm exploring it because I don't know what's the experience of this group. And there's no better way of doing a research to understand what are the experiences. I don't know what I'm going to find, but it is through talking to people, having conversations, and I'm in a better place to understand what are your learning experiences.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yes.
And so here, and you'll see how this can actually evolve into a mixed methods research, because I could first collect qualitative data, and then this qualitative data allows me to develop an instrument, a research instrument that I could then administer to a bigger group, a wider group of persons. Yeah?
So you're saying for now then, for that research, for now, focus on identifying the main topic of interest. Because initially I started talking about the research question. You're saying
I wouldn't want you to go into the research question. I'd want you to look at, okay, so what area am I seeing that is worth researching? Technology, for example, technology in HR, for example, is, I think, an area of focus. You know why? Gone are the days when HR is transactional. HR is now moving towards being transformational. So we're talking about strategic HRM, HRD, for example. So we're talking about even things like talent management and stuff. And so it's moving in a different direction. The question, well, and technologies certainly is helping us with things like data analytics, for example. Workforce planning, for example. HR planning, right?
Yes.
The real question is, how many of us are accepting of technologies? How many of us have the confidence to even embrace confidence?
It's something along those lines we were contemplating. So we discussed all of that, the interest of that sort of area to look at. I think where we were a little bit unsure is how do we express that in the form of a research problem or.
So let me help you. Let me help you. And in one of the videos we actually heard it. Go to the literature. So for example, what I'd suggest that you do, if for example you're looking at how HR is helping to improve HRD, for example, type that, right? Okay. Search for the literature on things like those, because the literature will actually help you to identify what is a potential area of study.
Got you.
Or what needs to be studied. So I always tell people, don't go sit down and bust your brain about what to do and when in there. A good researcher will identify for you what are the limitations of this research, what is worth, what needs to be studied more. Yeah?
Yes.
So they will tell you, okay, so this research has these limitations. Yeah? And so I'm suggesting that you go and do some research in these areas to further the body of knowledge. So you will find the gaps in the literature that will send you on a path to go researching.
Got you.
But the literature will also help to shape some of that idea that you have that is all over the place. So when you read the literature, you get the ideas and you say, oh, but you know, I could focus on this, or I could narrow down what I'm thinking to this particular area. So I'll give you an insight, not to take your time, but I'll give you an insight. When I started doing this PhD, I started looking at emotional intelligence. And then I have now narrowed it down to emotion regulation, which is a subset. And for different reasons, I couldn't find any literature, any instrument around it and stuff. And so it was the literature, doing literature search and stuff, that, and also I saw that it's one writer was saying that, tell you what, rather than measuring emotional intelligence, it is better to focus on different subscales. And having read, I started narrowing down and getting more specific and stuff. But I didn't start with a research question per se, right? A general, but I started going to the literature, and it's going to the literature that helped me to focus and research and mold and stuff. So my thing is to go to journal articles. Don't go to books. Don't go to YouTube, and when you go to journal articles.
Okay.
Right? Basically, focus on the literature, and through the literature, based on the topic we have in mind, we can refine the topic later. That's what you're saying.
So don't be wedded to the topic, and even with my PhD, the other day I changed the topic. So when I was looking through, I said, I first had, I think it was towards an understanding of, and then when I looked through, I said, but you know, it's not really towards an understanding, it's towards an explanation of. And so even to this stage, 8 years and counting, and I've changed the topic.
I can see how that evolved for training, sir, because I remember in the summer course training, we were to do a research paper. But because obviously we were more like a literature review, but with a research question. And I remember initially I was interested, the area of interest for me was when I examined my department, I was taken aback by the fact that a lot of times people go on training, but it is never transferred. And I was interested in wondering why that was so, particularly in my department, because I've even had experience with that where I was willing to transfer the knowledge, but I wasn't given the avenue to do so. But then when I started reading the literature, because how I posed my question initially was in relation to culture, organizational culture, and its impact on training. I didn't even know about training transfer at the time. And it's when I started reading the literature, I started learning more about this training transfer phenomena and what impacts on it. And then I started to refine, based on the reading, refine my idea of what exactly I want to be examining.
So you got it.
So yeah.
You got it.
I get that.
So, and I went through several iterations to figure out. So when you're doing a PhD, you know, them always say to you, that you need to know exactly what you're studying. Tell you what, I took years to finally agree on what I'm studying.
Right.
Because I had to delve into literature and delve in more and refine and reshape and refine and reshape and refine and reshape until I found finally settled what I was studying, and I could also tell people what I was studying, because that's the other thing, you know. You kind of have a general sense, but if them ask me, you scratch it, and then I say, well, you're studying, and you kind of scratch it because you haven't settled on it yet.
Right.
But the literature, having read the literature, it will help you to settle on what you're doing. But what you just mentioned there about transfer of learning, that could be a whole study in and of itself.
I realized that, sir, because I had difficulty even zeroing in
Yes.
on even that at the end of the day, and had to just narrow it down to, because like I said, initially I thought culture was the thing, but then
there are several factors.
Having read, I realized culture wasn't the only thing. There are so many things, the individual,
There's
you know.
so many factors. And the truth is that if you look, so you probably may have a good rationale for doing it in Jamaica, because I dare you, go and do some research and search for journal articles. So you can type journal articles, comma, transfer of learning, comma, Jamaica.
Yes.
PDF, comma, PDF, and see how many articles you find. Empirical articles that are written about transfer of learning in a Jamaican environment. I can tell you, you're not going to find a whole lot.
You're right. I didn't find much. I can't remember finding any actually, because I was trying to find some Jamaican example.
But then probably if you take out the Jamaica out of it, you may find some.
Right.
Right? So that's the point. So you could actually do a research quantitatively as well as well. You could do a mixed methods research, because you could actually go and search for articles, not articles, instruments that actually seek to measure, quantitative instrument that actually seek to measure transfer of learning. That's one approach. Or you could actually do a quantitative inquiry, and from that suggest that you're building a questionnaire to actually solicit data on people's or factors that actually influence or inhibit transfer of learning. Yeah?
Yes, sir.
So again, in my study, I looked at some of the factors that actually influence classroom management. There was a lot of literature about the factors that actually influence classroom management in Jamaica.
Yes.
Now I know, having done the research, the qualitative research, now I know. Yeah? So your literature review is going to be very important. All right?
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, man. So, but this is one of the good things that is having started out and just even start trying it out, you recognize that, there is some work to be done in this thing.
Yes.
Yeah? Yeah. All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, man. Good.
Thank you, sir.
But that was who was talking a while ago? Marsha.
Yes,
Yeah,
Marsha is
All right. Good. All right. Take care, guys.
All right. Good night.
Good night.
Good, good. Olivine, take care.